Welcome everyone to Have History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and since we finished the Hancock biography, I wanted to feature a prominent Western Confederate general who has a large following for his tenacity in battle and his military abilities, Patrick Cleburne. This is part 1, his early beginnings. Enjoy. Before he was a famed Confederate general, Patrick Cleburne was first an Irishman. In Ireland, he was born into a society in flux. The Irish Catholics were subjugated by the English and ranked below Irish Protestants on the social ladder. The Irish in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s existed in a tumultuous time and a poverty-stricken era for the island. A survey of one of the villages at that time showed that out of 9,000 inhabitants, there were only a total of 10 actual beds. Absentee English landlords used Irish tenant farmers to grow crops and could evict them and force them off the land as they saw fit. The Catholic were, for the most part, disenfranchised. The poor tenant farmers could only vote if they were paying an annual rent of 40 shillings. Also, if they voted for a Catholic, the candidate would have to swear under oath that he believed the invocation of the saints and the celebration of Mass were both superstitious and idolatrous. It was also illegal for Catholics to sit in Parliament at Westminster. The life of an Irishman was uncertain, and Patrick Cleburne was born into that society on March 16, 1828, in the rural Ovens Township. His father was a doctor, but by no means was he wealthy. However, his life was less uncertain because of his religion. About 20% of Ireland was Protestant, and the Cleburnes were part of that group. His mother, according to her parents, had married beneath her social status. Mary Ann Cleburne had been raised in a manor house and enjoyed a more affluent life than most Irish citizens. Her marriage to Dr. Joseph Cleburne had come with a dowry of £600, a wonderful supplement to the physician's medical practice. Before Patrick, Mary Ann and Joseph had 2 other children, William and Anne. In between the 3 siblings, she had 2 miscarriages. Although they lived in a rural area, the Cleburnes were still invested in the current politics arising in the cities, and when a candidate that supported the emancipation of Catholics to allow them equal political power to Protestants, Joseph Cleburne voted for that liberal candidate. The candidate's election sent shockwaves through Great Britain, and to hopefully avoid an uprising, Parliament passed the Catholic Emancipation Act in 1829. Although the Cleburnes were in a more affluent lifestyle, they still felt sympathy for those who were oppressed. The year after Patrick's birth, Mary Ann was pregnant again, being pregnant every year of her marriage thus far. She had had many complications associated with childbirth, but was able to birth a healthy boy named Joseph. After having the baby, complications arose, and she never recovered, dying in the fall of that year at the age of 37. The doctor, now with 4 children under the age of 5, hired a governess to look after the children, 18-year-old Isabella Jane Stewart. A year later, the 39-year-old doctor would marry the 19-year-old governess, and she would become the only mother Patrick would ever know. He called her Mama and asked her advice even into adulthood. The couple would have 4 children of their own, but one of Patrick's closest siblings was his sister Isabella, named after her mother. Patrick called her Izzy. In 1836, the Cleburnes would rise up the social and economic ladder when his father would lease a home called Grange House for £230 a year. The home was a 3-story Georgian house built around a 14th century country home that was itself built on the foundation of a 16th century abbey church. 2 tenant families came with the lease, and the rent from the tenants helped offset the annual lease payments. However, now the Cleburnes were members of one of the most despised communities in Irish society, the middlemen between the landlords and the tenant farmers. When Patrick was 12, his father sent him to Reverend William Spedding's Protestant school in Greenfield, about a mile away from their home, for about £50 a year. A large sum when the doctor was already stretched to pay his lease. However, Patrick's father wanted him to have an education. The Reverend created a strict regimen for his students, almost military-like, which may have began Patrick's interest in the military. Each December and June, before their vacations, the students would stand before the Reverend and 3 invited scholars, and the learned men would conduct oral exams. This was difficult for Patrick because he was generally shy in public. In 1843, tragedy struck the Cleburne family again. Patrick's father passed away from an illness at the age of 51. This halted Patrick's education. His older brother William came back to the estate to oversee its operation, and Patrick decided to leave the home to prevent being a financial burden on his family. he would apprentice with Dr. Thomas Justice. For room and board and an education in the medical field, Patrick would mix the doctor's powders, run errands, and assist the doctor with procedures. After only a year of apprenticeship, Patrick would submit an application to be a student at the Apothecaries' Hall in Dublin, but he was rejected twice. In the fall of 1845, some of the recently harvested potatoes began to show evidence of blight, brought on by a fungus that reduced the insides to a black mush. The Irish potato famine resulted in the starvation of thousands upon thousands of Irish. To relieve the starving Irish, Parliament funded works projects for the Irish to work by raising taxes on the landlords, and the more tenants a landlord possessed, the more taxes he had to pay. This contained two big flaws. One, the Irish didn't need money, they needed food. There was no food to buy in the first place. Two, the landlords, more often than not, would kick tenants off their land to avoid paying the taxes, which only exacerbated the problem. This sent the country into an economic downturn, and Patrick was directly impacted. Dr. Justice could no longer keep him as an apprentice, and the young Irishman could not go back home and put a financial strain on his family, so he decided to go to the Apothecaries' Hall in Dublin in person and plead his case. However, his lack of education in Latin and Greek forced the school to turn him down for a third time. Without anywhere to go, Patrick decided to join the army. He enlisted on February 27, 1846 in the British 41st Regiment of Foot, who were scheduled to return to India very soon. When he enlisted, he lied about his age, where he was from, and his occupation. He later said that he did this to prevent his family from knowing where he had gone, because he felt that he had disgraced them by not getting into the apothecary school. Instead of heading to India, the 41st became an army of occupation in Ireland, protecting the landlords from vengeful peasants, traveling all over the countryside, attempting to snuff out pockets of resistance. After 2 years in the army, he attained the rank of corporal, but he lost it very quickly. When the soldiers were called out to drill, instead of shouldering the 20-pound knapsack, he stuffed the knapsack with a pillow. He was horrified when the order came down to inspect knapsacks during drill. As Cleburne said, there was no help for it. The pillow was found, and I was a corporal no longer. The Cleburnes back at Grange House were desperate and decided that Ireland held no possibilities for them, but the United States did. They decided to immigrate. Izzy told her brother about the move, but when a soldier enlisted, it was usually for life. However, you could buy a discharge by paying back the monarchy for all they had provided for you as a soldier. As luck would have it, Patrick had turned 21, and he inherited his portion of his mother's dowry. He used it to pay off the discharge. He would later write, "I would now be a poor servile mercenary without a will or a thought of my own, in some soul-cramping fortress or barracks. I should at best in my old age hold the commission of a petty officer, detested by inferiors and looked down upon by superiors." He turned his back on the British Army and never looked back. By the end of 1849, Cleburne was aboard a ship with his brothers and sister, destined for the United States. One of his biographers said it most beautifully. The Patrick Cleburne who took passage for America in 1849 bore little resemblance to the 19th century stereotype of the bluff and hearty Irishman. He was cool and reserved, for life had taught him that it was not always a good idea to draw attention to oneself, but his ambition continued to burn. In Ireland, he had become intimately aware of how artificial barriers could kill ambition. Barriers against Catholics in public office, against young apprentices who could not read Latin, and against promotion into the officer corps from the ranks of the British Army. He was now going to a land where he believed few barriers existed. Quietly confident and fiercely ambitious, he eagerly looked forward to making his mark in America.